Adam, so one of the age-old things that startups do is, this decision of whether or not they use contractors or employees. And a lot of times people just think like, oh, it's just whatever I want to do. Can you kind of walk us through how you know when somebody should be an employee versus when they could be a contractor, or maybe it's more appropriate for them to be a contractor?
Yeah, and we've talked about this topic a couple of times, and there, as I've said before, there are a number of agencies which may look at the relationship slightly differently, may have their own definitions of what it means to be an employee. And what I have on our screen right now is actually directly from the Department of Labor, and I think it's really a good illustration of how they generally view the differences between the two. And we have to keep in mind that worker preference or business preference is totally irrelevant. Meaning, if someone comes in and says, I want to be an independent contractor, pay me that way, treat me that way, that's totally irrelevant. Preference is not ever considered in terms of a relevant factor. So, looking here on the screen, this is directly from the Department of Labor website. They have an illustration which says, are you an employee or an independent contractor? And you can see the differences between the two. Some indicators of an employee are someone who, for example, is working for somebody else's business and can generally earn more by working additional hours. This is someone who typically uses the employer's materials or tools, typically works for one company, making them economically dependent on that one company. The relationship is typically, an at-will employment relationship, which means there's no scope to it. It's indefinite potentially. The employer tells the employee how to do his or her job and when the work is to be performed. So that goes into the structuring and the control factor that an employer has over its worker. And the employer assigns the work that's to be performed. So if any of the relationships, potential sounds like anything I just went over, it's leaning towards it being an employer-employee relationship. Now, keeping in mind that independent contractors fall outside the scope of the employment classification. And some indicators that the Department of Labor may find in favor of there being an independent contractor relationship are someone who is in business for themselves, meaning they're likely incorporated, they likely have their own business, and their business is happening to be providing a service for your business, but it's their own business. Okay, that's a true independent contractor. Someone who can increase profit through their own business decisions, meaning they're not relying on you to increase their profit, they're relying on themselves and some of the decisions they make for their own business. They provide their own tools because it's their own business. They're not using your tools, they're not using your materials, they're using their own because they're in business for themselves. They often work with multiple clients rather than one, because that way they're economically dependent on themselves and they can spread themselves out as much as they so choose and not have to rely on one employer for their compensation. The relationship is typically temporary until a project is completed. So this is really a project by project analysis. This is not someone who's just doing the same thing over and over and over for an indefinite period of time. This is someone who's coming in for a particular project. An independent contractor is someone who decides how and when they will perform the work because it's their business. They can choose those things. And then they also decide what project or works that they will take on. So those are the factors there, which, like I said, are very illustrative in terms of how the Department of Labor analyzes this. And it's also helpful to analyze this in context with, a legal professional when deciding how to structure your relationship with your workers.
That's great. I've never I don't think we've ever walked through it in that much detail before, and it really does lay out those differences pretty clearly, which is useful because most people don't take the time that they should to go through these.
Well, I'll post the link to the chart so others can find it. But I think it's helpful to just see it, as the foundation, and like I said, in conjunction with consulting with legal counsel.